Chapter 20 of Betty Baird by Hamlin Weikel. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Holly Jensen. Chapter 20. Her Commencement. Betty's last year at the Pines was a time of great development. Always graceful and untrammeled, her slender figure had acquired a dignity of carriage, which, combined with the rapidly increasing maturity of her face, gave a vivid impression of forceful personality. She lost none of her vivacity or brightness of spirit. Always cheerful and hopeful, she brimmed over with sunshine. She possessed, too, that indefinable something which the girls called style, and those who looked deeper spoke of as charm, a distinction which came principally from her self-forgetfulness. By some rare good fortune, Betty had skipped that painful period of self-consciousness, when the real girl seems for a time to become imprisoned, and some suffering, blushing, unhappy, and malapert witch to have usurped her place. Poor misunderstood things! When they want to make a brilliant speech, 9 times out of 10 they are accused of impertinence or sarcasm. Their speeches before and after being made, it seems to them, are like the trick of the clever magician, in which he puts a rose up his sleeve and in its place takes out a viper. This lack of awkwardness in Betty, Miss Greene believed to be due to the influence of the Order of the Cup, which early had taught her to consider other people's feelings and interests, until her own had only a normal and healthy proportion of her thoughts and dreams. But Betty remained a dreamer to the end, a dreamer in the sense of one to whom came beautiful visions of life as it might be, and as she was young enough to believe it would be, thoughts that lifted her feet from the earth to walk on clouds. They kept her young in the ways of the world and indifferent to worldly valuations, though her growing sense of fitness and beauty made her sensitive to the many small amenities and ceremonies of life, of which she had been blissfully ignorant when she first came to the Pines. She profited greatly, too, by her association with the strong characters of Miss Greene and Miss Spice, whose influence supplemented that of the equally strong, though essentially different, character of her mother. Miss Greene was, in the best sense, a woman of the world, cultured by contact with leaders of thought and action, both here and abroad, not only a teacher, but a writer on the great educational topics of the day, and a participant in many of the advanced philanthropic movements of the metropolis. In all respects a woman of action, yet one who had kept her heart warm and her spirit youthful, and whose never-failing appreciation of the sources of girlhood impulses made her a much-sought confidant and adviser of the young. Betty's mother, cultivated in all the good old home culture of which New England is justly proud, for she had moved to Pennsylvania from New England, was of all women the most unworldly. Education she had of the highest degree. She was widely read in the masterpieces of ancient and modern literature, and thoroughly conversant with the topics of the times, as presented in the leading newspapers and magazines. Yet she conceived her duty to lie chiefly, if not entirely, with her home and her husband's flock. To them she was ministering angel, counselor, guide, and friend. Between these two, similar in breeding and feeling, though so far apart in their experiences of life, both representing in its highest type the grand old name of gentlewoman, Betty received rare training in all the essentials of perfect womanhood. Miss Spice, more than any other teacher at the Pines, developed her love of learning for its own sake. She was preeminently the scholar of the school. To study and to teach the things she loved to study made up to Miss Spice almost the sum and substance of life. A somewhat extended sojourn in foreign countries had meant little but additional opportunities for adding to her store of knowledge, and of these she had availed herself to the full. Her learning, however, had not destroyed her sympathy with the submerged of our great cities, and her one hobby, a hobby which had survived the trials of 10 years, was the settlement work in New York, to which the festival of the Order of the Cup had generously contributed. Her interest in Betty, starting with her desire to see her progress in her own beloved branch of mathematics, had been greatly increased and intensified by Betty's enthusiasm for the order, whose efforts, so far as it concerned the members' work outside of their own immediate environment, she had turned principally in the direction of supporting enlarged fresh air work by the settlement. Betty's cousin, Miss Payne, had exercised very little influence on her life. Almost continual traveling had kept her away from the school. She had been in England, and the girls said, in every city and town in the United States that boasted a woman's club. During her long and frequent absences, Miss Greene had charge of the school, and its success was abundant testimony to her ability to conduct it. In Lois, Betty found an ideal companion and friend. During those first weeks of her severe trial, their friendship struck its roots deep into the soil of sympathy and similarity of taste and feeling. It was a friendship unique among schoolgirls for its stability and its unselfishness. Though unlike in many characteristics, the two girls never jarred, and in all their dreams of the future, which were many in this dream time of early girlhood, they were always together, doing the same things, loving the same people, cherishing the same ideals. Mary Livingstone, next to Lois, was the schoolmate Betty admired most, and that she was several years older only added to her charm. But Mary had graduated the first year, and since then they had only met on Betty's short visit to New York and at the commencement season. She had been Betty's first champion when the latter was the poor, persecuted little soul, and as such she would wear a halo throughout Betty's life. Yes, her future would be without some of its essential ingredients if she could not see Mary often. During the year, Betty and Miriam were thrown more and more into each other's society, until the bitterness of Miriam's feeling greatly diminished, owing to the outgrowing of childish jealousy and to the determination of some of their friends that they should come together in a united class sentiment. Of course, Betty was pleased to be on less unpleasant terms with the only unfriendly girl in the school, and she went fully halfway to make up. While their relationship never developed into friendship, at least it ceased to be open hostility. Betty and Lois resumed their reading to Mrs. Humphrey, and continued it through the year, for her son had been appointed master of a ship and had gone off on another long voyage, though not before seeing his mother provided with a constant companion. The son's long letters about distant lands and adventures afforded them intense delight, and the elderly woman and the two young girls passed many gay hours, imagining the things the sailor graphically described. Commencement week came, and the life at the Pines, which at first had seemed interminable, was now almost at an end. Betty said it reminded her of an accordion, all stretched out at the beginning, 3 years before, and now closed, the folded years hidden away, and the two ends meeting. She had gone through her final examinations with flying colors, and had gained the proud post of valedictorian. Dorothy was salutatorian. Miriam was class poet. Jess, as class historian, found ample field for her jokes and bright reminiscences. Lois held the grave position of class prophet, and she and Betty had some happy hours as they dreamed of the future of this wonderful class. For Betty, one of the greatest events of the week was the coming of Mr. Baird, and she was all excitement over seeing her best friend's father. He was small and delicate looking, and one saw at a glance that the daughter had inherited many of her fine and charming traits from this very reserved but lovable man. His health required him to spend a large part of his time in travel, and he was rejoiced that in the future he would have his daughter for a traveling companion. Of course Betty's father and mother came, and everyone at once fell in love with the sweet-faced woman. There was some shyness with the father, to whose profound scholarship Miss Payne had more than once referred. His apparent coldness, the result of a natural reserve and a studious life, gave to strangers the impression of hauteur which his somewhat pedantic phraseology tended to augment. But his parishioners, who knew the sterling qualities that underlay the reserved exterior, never made this mistake. On this occasion he fell easily and naturally into his place, in the company of the bishop and the other learned men who had honored the occasion with their presence. With them he was perfectly at ease, and discussed the most abstruse questions with the utmost freedom, and an authority of erudition that gave him a high position among them. The most startling event of that momentous week was, who would believe it, that Miss Jane and the elder came with Dr. and Mrs. Baird to see Betty graduate. The roommates could hardly believe the astounding news, but the first thing they saw as the train stopped was Miss Jane's eager face, and waving behind it the elder's old green umbrella. The elder became a great favorite with the class, and he did himself proud by presenting to Betty's particular friends some real nice posies, as he called the superb roses he had brought for the great occasion, roses of his own growing, but he saved an immense bunch to give to Betty when she read her valedictory. Miss Jane had the time of her life, and not only inspected the styles at a distance, but felt of the lovely gowns until she had a full realization of the flimsy character of modern materials, and of the shame of wasting time and money on them. The inside seams of gowns, fresh from some famous metropolitan dressmaker, were a scandal to her. While at the school, Miss Jane's manner in private was very severe over the extravagance and the poor inside finish of the dresses. But when she got back to Weston, it underwent a complete change, and her air of authority on such matters, as she told of the splendors of the Pines, was a wonder to behold. Commencement day arrived, and to the eager eyes scanning the sky at daybreak, it presented an unbroken expanse of heavenly blue. Night came on fair and cool for that time of the year, though so accommodating is nature at rare times, for which we love her, as we do infrequent smiles, it was not too cool for those ideal dress materials of a young girl's commencement, white mull, organdy, and Swiss. Betty's simple, lovely dress, the gift of her cousin, gave her a feeling of rapture that only one other dress can equal in a girl's lifetime. Lois wore one not unlike it. Indeed, all the girls looked like white rosebuds from the quaint old garden, which they were soon to leave forever. The music, the flowers, the soft summer air, the glamour of tomorrow, the dear, fearful future, all gave a joy akin to sorrow, indeed the nearest to sorrow that many of them had ever felt. But hopes were high, and life was a fair sea on which their tiny barks would soon be launched. Life! Just the word thrilled them. How it ran like a golden thread through all they said, these fair, brave young mariners. The elder, at 80, was awed into something like respect for this life he had so unthinkingly sailed. Having his work to do, he had never meditated on it, but as it fell from the sweet young lips, the word took on a new meaning, and he tried to catch its elusive sense. Miss Jane just enjoyed the purtiness of it all, keeping one unwavering eye on Betty, and the other on the outlook for anything new in styles. When Betty arose to deliver the valedictory, Mrs. Baird clasped her hands and turned pale. The doctor sat immovable but intense. Miss Jane peered around to see how everyone was taking that ravishing vision. Then her eyes never left the girl's face. The elder crouched down in his seat and waited for the music of her voice. The bishop's face brightened, and he leaned over to whisper to Paul, whose glance at Betty and affirmative nod to his grandfather seemed to have something in common, while the body of students, seated in the front rows, greeted their leader, their heroine, with a subdued, worshipful "Ah." As she stood there, her face slightly flushed with excitement, she was a very different girl from the one who had come to the school nearly 3 years before. Though perhaps not tall for her age, she was above the medium height. Her tow-colored hair had darkened, and the yellow tints had deepened, until it could, without any stretch of the imagination, be called golden. The unruly tangle had become a soft, fluffy wave, which made a charming frame for the sweet young face. In her dark brown eyes were golden lights, which caught between the thick lashes gave a feeling of brightness, of sunlight. Her voice had long been noted for its richness and sweetness, and that, combined with an inspiring personality, lent to her words perhaps undue importance. But that they were of unusual weight for one so young was acknowledged by the bishop, who felt, like the elder, that he had discovered the young girl and had a part in her triumphs. As she stood there ready to read her short farewell, a little dog, his tail drooping in utter dejection, walked pathetically up the aisle and across the platform, and sat down sorrowfully at Betty's side on her first train, looking up into her face with sad, adoring eyes. He had been rolling in the mud, and the tear-stained locks marked dark circles around his bloodshot and melancholy eyes. Patiently he sat there, and Betty, evidently careful not to disturb him, looked down with a smile, and went on speaking without a break. With his dismal old face turned up adoringly, he watched her until she had finished, joined in the storm of applause that followed by thumping his stumpy tail wildly on the floor, then walked slowly off the platform and disappeared as he had come. After Miss Payne had uttered the closing words of the exercises, Betty sat there receiving congratulations, surrounded by bouquets of magnificent flowers from the Livingstones and half a dozen other city friends, from the bishop and his grandsons, from the elder, from Miss Jane, from Lois's father, and from many undergraduates. But the elder said, "She's the purtiest posy of 'em all." End of chapter 20. Recording by Holly Jensen. End of Betty Baird by Anna Hamlin Weikel.